Thank you very much. And I appreciate seeing some familiar faces in the audience here today. So thank you for being here and taking some time from your summer to spend with us. I believe we already have the slides up. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues, Faith and Reginald, for doing this with me. We are going to be tag teaming, so switching between the three of us as we go through the slides. So I am going to now pass it down to Faith.
Hi everyone, I'm Faith Perlow. I am from Specs. Just a little bit of what we're going to be doing here today, a lot. We're eventually going to get you into some breakout rooms. First, obviously we had the introductions. We're going to talk about the workshop learning outcomes, and then going to talk about our learning outcomes in the DIV. Each one of us, we're going to go into specifics with examples about how to kind of engage the students in activities with each learning outcome. And then we're going to go into kind of a breakout session. Noemi is going to spearhead this with an example of her course, one of her courses. And then we're going to be putting you into the breakout rooms. If you have, courses in mind, materials in mind, this would be the time to do that, to ask questions. We can start putting things in the chart, getting some language going, or you can ask us questions in the breakout rooms. And then we're going to have a Miro board visualization of things that you've learned from the workshop, tasks you can give your students, assessments that you could give your students to tackle each one of these lows, and then we'll be kind of wrapping things up. And I made this pretty, word map for you of our learning outcomes. So enjoy. I also wanted to play a little bit of a game, 2 truths and 1 lie. So you will have to guess which one the lie is. So we have approved our first biodiversity course this semester. Number 2 is most of our committee members go by the pronouns she or her. And 3, we have approved a course called Interrogating Whiteness, and I cannot see the other word. Racism, that's important. Anti-racism and privilege. So which one do you all think is the lie here?
And we can use the chat room, yes?
Yes, you can use the chat. If I can find the chat. It's always an issue when sharing my screen. So, I have one. Number 1, that's the lie. Anyone else agree? Number 1?
Those that just joined you, I think Christina, we're doing truths and a lie, and you can put in the chat which one you think is the lie. We have a couple of votes for number 1.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got a number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2.
Making things interesting.
All right, I'll give it another second. Get your votes in. I think it's a tie right now.
Mm-hmm.
Between 1 and 2. All right, we need a tiebreaker. 3.
That'll be interesting.
I was hoping someone was going to say number 3. Oh, okay, we got so 2 is actually true. Yes, so most of our committee members go by he or she or her. Most of us are female. We do have Reginald here, and we have a couple other male members as well, but we are female led. And actually number 1 is our lie. We did have our first bio course that we approved, but it wasn't biodiversity. So we're kind of sticking to the human realm of things. So that has been a challenge for some proposals, but we are open to kind of all fields and all disciplines. It just really needs to be about the human experience. And we have approved a course about interrogating whiteness. That was an interesting course. We had a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas going around about this course, but yes, we eventually, I think, approved it a year ago in the fall. I can't remember exactly when we approved it. But yeah, so November is our lie.
Thank you. And thank you because Faith had the creativity to come up with this, these questions for us today.
Great way to demystify.
Yes, yes, I appreciate that very much. All right. Also, as you know, if you haven't looked at your description yet, this particular workshop is intended to do some of the things that Faith already mentioned, which is we want to be able to exchange ideas so that we can see how it is possible to infuse these ideas of diversity and equity into our courses and intersectionality. And so then we want to have some practice doing that by working with existing course ideas that you may have so that we can use the famous sheet or grid for proposals and see how we can transfer information from our existing courses into that. And lastly, we want to definitely share ideas about assignments or assessments and other activities for courses here. And at the end, Faith is going to tell us more about course transfer, learning transfer and course consistency ideas and how others have proposed doing that. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Reginald to tell us what's next.
Thank you, Naomi. Good afternoon, colleagues. The fall of last year, I was fortunate enough to join Naomi and Faith as SPA's representative to this committee. And so I'm a relative newcomer, but they get you trained up real quick. And so you get thrown into the deep end of the pool. They watch you as lifeguards to make sure you don't drown. And you, before very long, are swimming with the rest of the committee members. But before I offer my introductory remarks about this particular slide, I'd be remiss if I didn't extend to Naomi and Faith my appreciation. They have done some fine work on this committee long before I joined it. And I think the university is already, and the student body is enjoying the fruits of that labor. After almost 40 years of public sector experience, mostly at the federal level, I joined AU as an executive in residence in August of 2017. And I split time between the Department of Public Administration and Policy and the Key Executive Leadership Program. And I suppose that background makes me a pracademic. My chair has asked me, Naomi has asked me to share a couple of examples that showcase the importance of our work on this committee and to set the stage for our discussion of learning objectives. My first example pertains to the power of longevity and my opportunity to bear witness to the cultural evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the federal space as a Chief Human Capital Officer and Deputy Commissioner of Human Resources and Chief Diversity Officer for the Social Security Administration for a 15-year period. I had a front row seat and significant responsibility for ushering in several iterations of diversity, equity, and inclusion in federal government. Some of the changes were functions of political change, but much of the evolution was driven by the continuous improvement of dialogue around issues of civil rights, social justice, and the realization much of the conflict was ultimately anchored in racist doctrines, policies, and perhaps most significantly practices and actions that result from that. When I became DCHR, Deputy Commissioner for Human Resources in 2002 and the Chief Human Capital Officer in 2003, the Bush administration was promoting diversity as a government-wide agenda. During the Obama years, the agenda evolved into diversity and inclusion and resulted in the creation of the Diversity and Inclusion Councils pursuant to executive order. And I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to anyone that there was retrenchment during the Trump years, but the Biden administration has bounced back with executive orders calling for equity as an essential component of the D&I agenda. The second point I was asked to share came from the experience I had in the classroom prior to going virtual because of the pandemic. In the spring semester I offer a course in managing human capital assets. And it is a course that covers, among other human capital content areas, managing equal employment opportunity in the workplace, as well as agendas focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. During the spring of 2019, I was taken aback by a very bright graduate student disclosing in class that her public school education in Arizona was devoid of any references to our Civil War. Instead, they learned of the Indian Wars, as she called them. I was flabbergasted, as you might imagine, by her casual admission of ignorance about the Civil War and our shameful history of chattel slavery. I knew I might have to do some explaining for my students who were not educated in the US, but I wasn't expecting to find that some of my homegrown graduate students were abysmally educated during their formative and adolescent years. When I joined the committee, I asked if DIV was an acronym for something or simply an abbreviation for diversity. And I guess it's just an abbreviation for diversity. But learning, well, at this point, I guess I should turn it back to Faith because she's got a couple of things she needs to talk about before we get into the learning objectives. Faith?
Thank you, Reginald. So I just wanted to briefly touch on this outside in, inside out perspective that kind of encompasses this whole thing, and then we'll start to get into the learning outcomes. So we really want to focus on making this inside out perspective explicit. So taking the marginalized voices, marginalized cultures, marginalized thoughts and practices, and centering those experiences and those voices first. So that's kind of where we center everything to start with low A that Reginald will go into a little bit more. So that's what I really wanted to highlight here. And then thinking, what is the dominant culture? Who are the marginalized people? And then from there, everything gets kind of put into place as we go along with each learning outcome. And even not just thinking about people and culture, but thoughts and ideas. We're going to see two examples later on that kind of exposes there's not exactly a marginalized group of people, but marginalized thinking and those aspects. So that's what I wanted to put into focus before we then move on to intersectionality, and then eventually how all of this is eventually connected back to the AU core curriculum. So Naomi, do you want to?
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you both. All right. So what we wanted to give you was that background to see how this is fitting with what's happening, right, beyond the borders of AU. And we have a curriculum that is very forward thinking at AU in terms of being very intentional about having all students exposed to these kinds of concepts and ideas and this kind of thinking. So we have in the AU core curriculum, for those of you who may not be familiar, we have foundational courses that students have to take, and among those there is one called AUX2, and in AUX2 in their first year, students start to talk about inequalities and legacies of oppression and history of racism, things like that, so that becomes a foundation for them to later take these other courses that are called diversity and equity courses, DIV. So it's a very nice, well-oiled machine, right? We have the foundational course and then the integrative course in the DIV. So the DIV is trying to touch upon these things that Reginald and Faith talked about, including the idea of thinking of intersectionalities. And when we are considering marginalized populations and people and their way of thinking, if a class that you may have in mind has one group in mind that is considered marginalized, we want to also infuse intersectionality in that course so that you are also thinking what other aspects of identity, of social categories of human difference are intertwined with this major or main aspect that your course is focusing on. And so we want to make sure that it doesn't have, that it's not just one group that gets examined, but that we understand other aspects of identity that intersect in terms of understanding the oppressive experiences that they may have. So with that, I think we're ready to go to the next slide. And we are going to briefly tell you what the learning outcomes are in the DIV. So if you're familiar with proposing a course for the curriculum, the core curriculum, you know that there will be learning outcomes in each of those courses in the curriculum. And so for DIV, we have 4 learning outcomes that we're looking at. And in addition, we have 2 other requirements, and the other 2 requirements would be that you incorporate intersectionality and that the voices of the marginalized in terms of authors of the papers they read or books they read or videos they watch, those individuals represent that marginalized population that your course is looking at. So here are the 4 learning outcomes. The first one has to do with trying to center around that marginalized population and including that intersectionality, right? And then the second learning outcome is more about the history and the legacies of oppression that that group has experienced, and thinking also of resistance and what has been the responses to that oppression. And the third learning outcome deals specifically with inequality and structural inequality so that students can think about system levels factors. And then the fourth outcome is about equity, is thinking about what does it take, right, to have a more equitable society. So each of us is going to tell you a little bit about how this is implemented, like how different courses tackle this. And we're going to go to the first learning outcome, and Reginald will take it from here.
Thank you, Nomi. I tend to think of learning objective A as foundational, and it obviously brings into play what Nomi is talking about with regard to historically marginalized people. As I was thinking about discussing this as part of this workshop today, I couldn't help but be influenced by what's going on in the news, where it appears that what many of us would consider factual in today's world can have alternative interpretations such that you wouldn't recognize what you were considering factual. So one could argue that marginalized peoples can be in the eye of the beholder. However, we try in this process to keep it to historically validated groups and experiences. And so, and while we may be receptive to, for example, other cultures where the marginalization of people may not play out quite the way it does in the United States or in Western societies, nonetheless, when we're talking about marginalization, we're looking at the historical trends and current events. So I think from my point of view, it's always a work in progress because we really do try to respond very favorably to the creativity and the sort of transference of thinking in a particular area that's being presented, a particular course that's being presented. But as Nomi was referring to, what we want to do here in Learning Objective A is have the course presenter show clearly how the students are going to get a good sense of the marginalization of people, how that marginalization is experienced by the people being marginalized, making sure that their voices are coming forward in the thinking and discussion of the course material. And it often will play out as that second bullet under who are historically marginalized peoples, that there's a dominant culture that is presenting one perspective and a marginalized group of people who have to contend with that domination Sometimes it results in oppression such that there is a pushback against it. Other times, because of the oppressiveness of the dominant culture, the response ebbs and flows. But what we try to do with the Learning Objective A is to have a very clear sense that the course is going to show that domination and marginalization in a way that represents the phenomenon that's being presented. I'm sorry, this is a slide that will show this concept, and this is, most of the courses I think that are presented to us do a pretty good job of laying out Learning Objective A. It's probably the most basic and fundamental learning objective that you have to contend with. It gets a little more complicated as we move to Learning Objectives B, C, and D.
And just to kind of throw this out there, this is a TESOL course that was proposed this semester. And the marginalized group here is multilingual individuals and a variety of like linguistic groups. So it doesn't have, it's a precise group, but not exactly a precise, culture, right? Multiple cultures within this. And this is just a really great example of how you can also take one of the learning outcomes and intertwine it in with your own learning outcomes. So if you want to read through this a little bit more, we're not going to read through all of this. You can kind of get a sense of how they're explaining the marginalized group here. And then the second column are the activities and assessments associated with getting at that learning outcome.
Thank you for adding that. I was going to also give an example of a course that recently came to our committee in which the marginalized, right, is really when you think of cultures in the field of philosophy, philosophical thought that has not been given that center position, right, that has been marginalized and seen as inferior. And so that course is bringing that marginalized philosophical thinking to the center. And so that also qualifies as being appropriate for the DIV.
So it doesn't just have to be a group of people, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we would typically think of. It can be thoughts and practices.
But these thoughts and practices exactly come from a particular cultural space that hasn't received that value in our culture. Great. Okay, so now we can go to Learning Outcome B. In Learning Outcome B, as I said earlier, we're looking more into the idea of history and legacies of oppression is the language that is used here. But there is this other component in which we also are interested in seeing, if possible, responses, right? Like what can be ways in which the oppressed have resisted these legacies. And then how all of that may have shaped what we see today. What are the contemporary realities? And so I wanted to give you two examples, and I'm so glad to see in our audience someone who proposed this class to us. So a shout out to Brenda Chow here in the audience, because we were very excited to get this course in the review process. And so in this course, and Brenda, you can chime in if you want, in the biomedical research course that Brenda and colleagues proposed, for Learning Outcome B, what they're looking at is the exploitation that has happened historically among people of color, specifically among African Americans with regards to research, biomedical research. And in terms of thinking of responses, right, that other piece of this learning outcome, they give content for the students in which the students will be thinking about the distrust that the African American community may feel towards research, biomedical research, and how they may be disengaged from some of those kinds of projects, right, because of that experience of exploitation. So they bring it all to tie it up very nicely. So thank you, Brenda, for what you did with this class with regards to Learning Outcome B. Another example I have is from Colgoth. the management and organizational behavior class. And this is a class that is a requirement for their majors. And I wanted to give you that as an example so that you can see how people get creative and are able to bring this content, this diversity kind of focus to a class that is required for everyone, and that sometimes we don't even think that that might be possible, but they did a great job with this. And so for learning outcome B, as an example, one of the areas that they're focusing on is the idea of biases and stereotypes in organizations, right? Like how those things get manifested in the workplace. And in terms of responses, they're looking at several things, but one of them is the equal employment opportunity as a tool that was created in response to those biases, right? And the third bullet point is an example of an assignment. And this assignment is a poster in which students have to collect information about the current state of diversity in a specific organization. And that also helps them see this learning outcome B. So those are a few examples for you. There are many more courses out there, but these are just a few. Can we go to the other one? Thank you.
For a sec?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know, the camera's not working right. Anyway, this is the course that Meredith and I put in.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so glad that you're here.
Sure. But I did have to comment back at you that why would it be unexpected from the business?
Oh, because sometimes I think this is my bias, perhaps.
Absolutely.
My bias that a class that is going to be like a requirement for everybody may not be the tool, the setting that
Right.
some people are willing to go there. So I was really pleased to see that you were willing to go there.
Well, right. Just to point out, because we all suffer across campus of not knowing what each other do all the time. But of course, what we're doing in the business school is working with people to build good organizations for our society. So, we're definitely part of this as much as anyone else.
Oh, fantastic. No, for sure. And we are really, really appreciative. But I think I was more thinking of the hesitation that perhaps some people may feel like this is going to be everybody taking it, and you did it. You did it. So I want people to see that we don't have to be afraid of trying this with a required class, that everybody can take it. Yeah. All right. So learning outcome C, it's about the structural inequalities. And Mark, I think you can comment on this one because it's your course. In this learning outcome, we're trying to look more at those systemic issues, right, that cause these differences, these disparities between groups, and create this, it's like a cycle where the systemic issues create or reinforce the differences between people, these categories of difference, but then the categories of difference, because of where people are positioned, then continue the inequalities. So the course that Brenda proposed that I mentioned earlier, in the way that that class on biomedical research handled that, was to focus on the power issues in healthcare. Who are the people who provide healthcare? What is the access or lack of access that people have, and the results that has, right, on people's well-being. So that was a nice way to bring that structural inequality into focus. And for an assignment, they ask students to look into current events that will showcase, right, those differences in power in the health system. And then Mark, I don't know if you want to tell us about your assignment here, but I pulled up that one that says that they will be looking into examples from different organizations and how there is discrimination, practices of discrimination on the basis of social categories. But you are here, so you can probably explain this better than anyone.
We don't need to go into great detail in any of these, but there's lots of ways that we do this. I mean, traditionally, an easy way is you look at job ads and see what kind of language that they use and what's inclusive and what's not, from a legal aspect, a ethical aspect, a moral aspect, whatever stakeholder perspective you want to adopt. But and then lots of other things as they play out. Employee training videos. Who's in those training videos? How do we speak to people in them? What are our assumptions about, what is good employee behavior, like, eye contact, and a lot of the cultural sorts of things that we talk about. So broadly, it can be media, but media in many, many forms.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm so glad you were here. to sort of expand on that. And now I'm going to pass it to Faith.
Oh, sorry, Nomi, can I add on to that?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, these are your courses. Yours and Mark.
No, and I loved how we've got so many things that are very similar. You know, like you mentioned, Mark is in a COGOD and I'm in bio, but we're using a lot of the same kind of approaches. Like we're talking in my class, what I'm proposing is that we also take a look at the media, how they present these ideas, how scientists versus healthcare providers present these ideas as people of power and how they can be improved versus positive examples where they are potentially directed to marginalized groups, and how are they contextualized? I think that is so perfect to apply to all sorts of classes. So, you know, even though I'm doing bio versus Mark's in COGOD, we apply the same ideas, but it's targeted to our specific fields. And that's reflected in your learning outcomes that you have created as a group, right? So I really love that we can talk about these in different ways, but kind
different
of
disciplines. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm glad you're here too. All right. So now I think Faith can tell us more about this last learning outcome.
Yeah, and I will be real quick because we're kind of transitioning out of time. So this is LOD, and this is basically the so what of it all. And we typically think of all of the learning outcomes combined into LOD, but we have definitely changed our views as a committee in the past 2 years since I've been here. We have thought of this as more of an action or policy or project basis, but we've changed for a variety of courses into that more reflective, those more reflective aspects and the thought processes behind that. So I have 2 examples. I'm not going to read all of that to you, but I have screenshotted them. So they are somewhere here. There we are. This is religion, non-Western religious ethics. This is more of the thought process, the reflective aspect. A lot of discussion, but also specific assessments to get at this low, to have students engage with this low. So eventually they're going to be presentations, but the key here is these thoughts, these ideas, and reflecting on them. The TESOL course from before goes into more action policy aspects with a project, with a case study. So we can kind of see the differences here between discussion and reflection with some project elements and then more action related. And TESOL is, you know, teaching English to speakers of other languages. So these are students that are going to be trained to eventually teach English, and they could easily implement these aspects into their own courses for their own students eventually. So this is on the more action side of it. So you can read through those examples. Here they do a linguistic context report that kind of brings everything together. Briefly, once again, briefly, talking about discussion versus assessment. We love to see discussion, but we want to make sure that the learning outcomes are able to be assessed. So there needs to be some intentionality behind it and some transparency, especially in your syllabus for the students. We like to have very explicit stuff within our charts. The more examples you have, the better, but the other aspect of that is that if the students can't see it, that's going to be an issue. So the materials and the syllabus, the alignments of the prompts with the lows, that's really key. And we want to have those discussion aspects. If you are able to assess discussion in some way, that is great, but we do like to see, it can be anything from one question on an exam to a project, written reflection. We really just want to capture the low in a form of some type of assessment. So that's up to you, whether that is a kind of a lower stakes discussion, right, aspect of it that's maybe graded in some way, or a project or a question on an exam. but we really want to see it, and we want to make sure that it is also visible to your students.
And that's a great segue to the next piece, in which we all are going to get into practice mode, trying to think of courses that we have in mind and how to convert them into these learning outcomes. But that piece that Faith mentioned, that we want to capture it in some way, that's part of what goes in that grid in the proposal, is how are you capturing that for assessment. So we're going to practice that. And I wanted to give you an example of my class. I have a women and mental health class that I was teaching. And when the call came out for DIV courses, I thought my class would be a good fit for that. There were things I was doing already that sounded like it's the kind of things that the DIV was looking for. But in the process of trying to write this proposal, then it became apparent that I needed to be more intentional, right? About some of those things I was doing needed to be more transparent, as Faith said a moment ago, so that when I changed the class to be DIV, those things are more emphasized. Like I say more things about inequalities and structural issues. I say more about intersectionality. I emphasize why is it that in our class we talk about women, but we're also talking about women who have disabilities, or Black women who are gay or transgender, or so different aspects of a person's life that bring intersectionality right to the foreground. So I don't want to tell you so much more about the class, because then we lose time. And I think in our breakout group, we can talk more in each of our groups, but I'm hoping that you brought something in mind, perhaps, that you can try to explore how we can make it into the proposal for the DIV. So let's see if we can form some groups and then have some chat, maybe 15 minutes within the groups.
That'll keep us on time.
Yeah, okay.
So there's also a Miro board. I'm going to put you into breakout in a second, but in the chat, there's also a link to a Miro board. If you've never used Miro, you can, I think, access it through Gmail. The link should be available to you to, sign up and edit the document. But any ideas that you have that you want to put in there, I've broken it up into like 4 lows, obviously. So you can put those ideas as we go along. Just a way that we can capture everyone's thoughts all together and not just like in the chat or something. So let me break you out into group, if I remember how to do this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. There we are. I'm like, I do this every single day in class, and the one time I need to figure this out. Okay, so 4 or 5 participants, just randomly assigning you. So there we go. I'm going to try to get to make sure we're all, there we go. Okay.
And we get the access to the link to Miro.
Yeah, I'm gonna, is that in the chat again? Okay, thank you, Lindsay. I will broadcast that as well.
It looks like Nazia and Shada are in room 3, and there's a lot of people in room 1.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to move some people.
I was gonna go in there with them.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Of how people are doing this. So if anyone in the other groups were discussing ideas and want to debrief and share what came up in your spaces.
And we can also do this verbally.
Mm. So in hours, we found out the time was short, that we didn't get to do some of this.
Let me see if I can go back.
I think for me in our group, it was one of the things, it was just good to have some clarification about my questions about the process and what things I'm doing could be kind of better aligned for this type of course. So that was super helpful. Thank you, Faith and Kim.
Excellent.
In our group, where we left it was a conversation, and I'm simplifying, but how do you move from assigning writing and calling it a class that teaches writing? And how do you move from assigning some material that touches on these topics, that starts to infuse some diversity, to a course that is a diversity and equity course? So that was sort of where we were leaving our conversation when we came back to this room.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So in our group, we talked about so many things, but I think at the point in which I was with half a word there, we were talking about a class that sounded like it would be a great fit. And Mark, if you want to chime in on that one, is Mark still with us?
I think he left.
Okay. Mark was talking about a class on women and leadership, and he mentioned it earlier when we were all in the main room. And the question he had is, if these courses need to have intersectionality, how much of it, how is it demonstrated? And does it have to have specific categories of human difference, right, to be part of this intersectionality? So he's not here, but I want to clarify for those of you who may have a similar question. The idea is that you are thinking beyond the one category, whatever that other category might be that is significant and meaningful to your field, to what you're doing in your class, that would bring it's a sense of that you're not seeing it as a monolith, right? That you are considering the ways in which people in that group that you're looking at may have other kinds of experiences based on some other aspect of who they are. So for Mark, it could be that it's not about race, but it could be about class. So it will vary depending on what you're doing. I want to also be mindful that Brenda wanted to know more about assignments and ideas. And so I don't know.
I know when I started writing my, and I saw all those approved ones are posted on there, I didn't have a chance to review all of them before I started writing mine. So I know that's going to be a great resource for me as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you.
And I'm glad that you saw that even though the Mark's class was in COGOT in business, there are overlaps in ways in which you can pull things together. In my class, for instance, it's about women and mental health, and easily the class could have been all about white women, but that would not be attending, right, to some of the diversity and the experiences that women have in our society. So we do attend to other aspects like age and social class, ethnicity, race, disability, disability, gender, identity. So besides the idea of being, this binary, we look into other aspects of gender identity and sexuality identity as well. So trying to bring all of those pieces because it's relevant for my class. It may not be right in your space. And so ways in which I try to do, for instance, assignments, because we want to make sure that first learning outcomes is from the inside out, right? Like that's the terminology that Faith used earlier. We try to find first-person stories of women who represent these different groups that we're talking about, describing their experiences. What are those experiences of oppression or mental health problems or any of those things, but from their perspective. And so that helps us with the idea of the authors, right, should be representative of the marginalized group. So we do that in part of it in that way. And jump into the last learning outcome that Faith described earlier with equity. In my class, we talk throughout about the problems of inequity, but at the end is when we actually do an assignment that has to do with equity by doing a policy brief, like a proposal, right, that they're suggesting a change of action. But in other classes, some of that is not relevant. And so other classes may be that you're considering the values of a society that would be more equitable. I think, Brenda, in your class, you do have an activity that they have to do where they actually have a practice. I can't remember what it is now.
I think the final assignment was a public service announcement where they have to think about some health issue that impacts different groups, and they can choose whichever group that they hear from current literature or historical context or whatever they are interested in, and then try to make that public service announcement have contextual details, you know, and specifically address some of the structural inequities that exist for that group and make recommendations, because I make them write a narrative that accompanies that PSA that they create, and for them to reflect more deeply in terms of what structural inequalities exist that cause this to happen. And then how would they address this in their public service announcements, as well as, you know, follow up, you know, driving people to the clinics versus, you know, and things like that.
Very nice. Sean, do you remember what you've done in your class? For this equity piece?
It has changed every semester because I try and ask the students to come up with some of what they want to do. In talking about equity this semester, we ended up having some very interesting conversations around the George Floyd verdict in the last couple of weeks of class. I mean, before that, we had also had some other discussions, but that sort of led up to the ability to have that. It's been tricky in Zoom, but I feel like they actually did a really good job with being able to bring some of the really contemporary issues into the discussion.
Thank you.
And Brad, were you posing the question about the United States, whether it's limited to that?
Yeah, so we've received this question in the past, and Noemi, I know you've addressed it with various proposers, so I thought maybe you could speak to it here, which is, do the DIV classes have to be about the US, or can they look at other parts of the world?
That's an excellent question. And we have courses that are not about the US, yes. I think perhaps when the learning outcomes were crafted, right, we all had been thinking about the US and the issues that afflict us in the US. But we have been very fortunate to have many instructors on campus that have excellent ideas of courses they're doing that attend to cultural experiences outside. And so we have expanded our understanding of the learning outcomes by having those instructors help us see how that will look. So we do have courses, for instance, about, I can't remember exactly, like Japanese culture. There was something about Japanese culture. So it was not from the US, it was in Japan. The class that I mentioned earlier today about philosophies that are non-Western, it's not about the US, right? It's about just the idea of philosophies, but it's not.
In fact, that particular one delved into Eastern philosophy versus Western philosophy, and the sort of the underpinnings and assumptions of those two schools of philosophy are very, very different, and culturally, you know, obviously culturally influenced. That's the beauty of this committee and the faculty who submit proposals to us. It really comes down to the creativity and interests of faculty and students, and we're kind of open to all possibilities. I mean, we really love the creativity that some people are coming to us with. And I think Faith has made a really important contribution by talking about how for some people it's simply a tweak of their course. And it's very much the kind of thing we're talking about. In fact, and I hope to not be putting you on the spot, Adele, but you were really getting pretty passionate in our breakout session about a course that I was suggesting to you is real close, or if not already set up to be a submission to our committee. Did you want to share that?
Oh yes, all right. I just posted a question. Okay, yeah, I just posted a question in the chat box. Yeah, I think we ended our breakout room with that question. I mean, I had a question. Are you considering a kind of a DIV certification for courses? I gave the example of my course that I teach as an adjunct at the School of Communication. It is a course called Developing Nonfiction Productions. So we are talking about nonfiction productions and how to develop them. And in the discussions, we also look at the industry. We look at the industry articles. We look at, let's say, women representation in Hollywood scripts, women representation behind the camera. And I had a very, this past semester, I had a very great discussions about these topics. And I had a very diverse class, and I realized that when I designed the class, there's one assignment, for example, they have to analyze a cable channel. So you have to kind of really dive into, let's say, Discovery Channel or National Geographic. And then I realized that I have to kind of put onto the list channels that are kind of representing, let's say, underrepresented groups, like Opera Channel, for example, or and I did that, and that was really beneficial for the class. So so these kind of elements, you know, helping, I guess, professors to make decisions about their classes to include these components would be fantastic if you could. I don't know how you would do that, but I think professors would really appreciate, and it doesn't matter what you teach, I guess. It can be biology, it can be business. This all, there are sections that overcross, and where you have all these questions about underrepresented groups. It's not just race, it's race, it's age, it's religion, it's sexuality. There are a lot of different underrepresentations or oppressions going on at the same time.
I think that DIV is trying to formalize what you're saying, Adele, but then it's pushing a little more, right, to say that it's not just the content, right, that there would be opportunities for reflection and thinking about some of the other questions that we have that have to do with equity. So going beyond just presenting that content of a diverse segment of the population, but having other conversations around that too.
Yeah, and also including these topics into the student work. I mean, these students, they have to come up at the end with a proposal of a nonfiction production. So I guess that is also, how do I include these elements into, let's say into a proposal for a documentary, for example. It is not just receiving, it's also the output of the students that has to reflect what they have been learning.
Yes. So it sounds like you're a great candidate for working with us in the next few months if you want, and we can talk with you.
I was going to say that was the point I was making to Adele just as we were snatched back to the main group, that we offer, you know, very often faculty will submit a proposal and it's good, but we offer feedback on how to make it even better. And that give and take has resulted in, you know, some approvals that were I thought pretty impressive in terms of hitting the agenda that we're trying to hit with this committee. So if you submit, we will certainly give you that feedback, and who knows, you might get through on the first run.
So
We can work with you.
Wait, what? I haven't, it's not clear to me. A proposal for what? For my own class, or a proposal for a new class? I mean,
no, I think, well, what I was trying to get across to you in the breakout and didn't get a chance to explain it fully, is that, and I think Faith speaks to this a lot in our discussions as a committee, that sometimes people's courses are already there. That is, the kinds of things that we want reflected in those learning objectives, A, B, C, and D, you may actually already be doing much of it, and with some minor adjustments would be fully
Yeah.
in what we're talking about. So it would be your, and you asked the question, Adele asked the question about, are these new courses and your point earlier with Mark, Nomi, are we taking standard courses and essentially reviewing them as part of this? And I was suggesting to her that yes, we are open to all of that, new courses and existing courses that simply need to be tweaked and presented through this process to be recognized as one of the DIV.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to even consider a certification, of course. Like, I mean, you have the green courses, for example. You get, as a professor, a certification for the green course while you are doing certain things, not to be paperless and Yeah, you do all of it, certification, green course. And if students see that, they like that. Certification of DIV, students would like that, because then they see, hey, they really think about me, and in this particular course is actually addressing all these topics.
Indeed, that is what you will get after this process. Your course gets this DIV, those 3 letters get added to your class in the schedule of classes and in the catalog. I know Brad knows more about the process, and I don't know, Brad, if you want to chime in.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think your first step, Adele, would be to talk with your division director in the School of Communication. The certification of DIV is attached to a course rather than to an individual instructor. So the department will have to, the division will have to sign off on the course becoming a DIV. But once you have the permission of your division director, then we can partner you up with the committee to then develop that proposal. There's also a School of Communication committee member, Russell Williams, who we could also have you work with. But again, also Faith, Noemi, and Reginald are also excellent resources.
Yes, so we'll be happy to work with you.
Thank you.
To get that, yeah. I wanted to know, Hannah, I haven't heard what your interests are, and so that we are sure to respond to you too.
Thank you. I'm an adjunct in the economics department, and so I'm mostly just here to learn about the process and hear a bit more about what other people are doing in other areas. Thank you.
We are very fortunate that we this semester got 2 courses from your department, and we are excited that they are going to be part of the curriculum for DIV pretty soon. Your colleagues, Mickey Mears and Ivan Kraft, will have 2 courses in the books very, very soon on inequality. So for those of you in the audience, one is on inequality and the other one is on political economy of race. Very interesting courses. So I don't know if you have one in mind, Hannah, that you are considering.
I'm generally interested in immigration, and so that would be sort of something that I would be very interested in working on in the future.
Right. And as we said to Adele, and this is true for anyone else in the audience, we can work with you before you have to put it together. Like just the development process, we can work with you and have those brainstorming sessions and back and forth to help align things, with
one of the questions that came up, if there is a complex problems course, right, that is currently being taught, what is that process like? And from what I understood with what Catherine said, you would have to submit that as part of your undergraduate education curriculum committee within your department to then kind of move forward with that becoming a DIV. I just wanted to highlight that if we do have any, other complex problems courses that we're interested in turning into a DIV. And so we're always willing to, like I said, play around with the chart, little puzzle.
So I'll offer a slight clarification there.
Okay.
Complex problems courses cannot be other requirements. Habits of mind, though.
Okay.
And I suspect that's what the question might have come out of. But complex problems classes are a separate.
Our separate thing.
Yeah.
Can there be a possible conversion of like a new course with some of those ideas or not?
Some of what ideas? I'm sorry.
Like in the original complex problems course.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So there's, for instance,
it would just be a completely new course.
It would be a completely new course.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
And in fact, that has been the case. There was a course offered out of biology a couple of years back as a complex problem from Meg Bentley that is now the DIV. Brenda, I think it's the new version of what you all were thinking about. Is that separate from what she had originally?
It's completely separate. Yeah, I think hers is still in the works.
Yes. Okay, that's right.
But I wanted to give another example, a migration course. So Hannah, we have another migration course in the DIV. This one is from sociology, and it used to be a complex problems class, and now will be a DIV class. So yes, all of those crossovers are possible, but there have to be channels, the appropriate channels, right?
I think the lesson that we've learned is that, and this has worked in both directions of, as you teach these new requirements, you get a feeling for which level of students and where in the curriculum it's most successful. So whether in the case of the class that Meg Bentley was teaching, she realized that in fact, it was a little bit more successful to work with juniors or seniors who've had some more disciplinary background. And then the reverse has also been true of courses that used to be from years and years ago, the old honors colloquia, that now are pretty exciting to teach with first year students as a complex problem because they're so fresh to everything. So it can just move in both directions and you get a feeling for it.
Very good. Rebecca, are you still here? Rebecca expressed earlier interest in figuring out which courses could fit.
I think that was the same question.
Yeah.
I am still here. Sorry, I was washing my dishes while I was listening in. Sorry.
No problem.
I am still here, and yes, I was just kind of trying to figure out the ins and outs of where my my various where my ideas would fit into the framework.
What is your area, your field?
I'm also in biology. funny enough.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking in our breakout room about how I teach an urban ecology course for the complex problems core, and that that there is a part of it that I could kind of envision expanding out into a DIV, where we touch on socio-ecological disparities and how those kind of feed back into social justice issues, environmental justice issues, and yeah, so that was, it's still kind of like in its fledgling stages in my mind. And Catherine Kim noted that there is, Catherine, thank you for sending me that, that there is a course in philosophy that has similar, that's being taught. It's a DIV course for philosophy that is being, that is also being taught, but I looked over the plan for it, and it sounds like their trajectory with that course is significantly different from my ideas. So I think that it could work. Thank you.
Okay, I was going exactly at the same place that Catherine was. I was thinking of that course as well. But so it's good to know that it's a different thing. And Rebecca, the same thing we told Hannah and Adele, right? We would be happy to talk to you and sort of in the early stages, like we don't have to wait until it's fully developed, right? The early stages, we can talk, and so that could help with the progress. And then with Brenda and Sean, I know you are already almost in the midst of it for Brenda. She's starting soon, and Sean, you've taught this before. Again, I will be happy to meet with you. I know Faith and Reginald have been awesome too, and other friends in our committee will be also happy to talk with you to think of, oh, what other courses we know that may have more overlap with your interests and your ideas, so that we can focus better the suggestions that we can make based on what you have in mind. So that can give us a more targeted approach to engaging with you. So let's plan to do that, Sean and Brenda, so that we can find more examples that will be helpful to you in the future. All right, I think we are about to wrap this up. And Faith, where do you want to take us next?
We can just wrap it up. I think everyone's, I just wanted to briefly touch on learning transfer and course consistency. It can be as simple as just a few statements about learning transfer and course consistency, how you're handling that in your department, or it can be something like this, a little bit more extensive. So there's not kind of one or right way to do it. There's not a specific way, just as long as you're stating these things explicitly in the worksheet. So that's what I have for that. I don't want to take any more time. But if you would like to contact us, here is our information and our emails. So
thank you. Thank you for showing that, Faith. And I appreciate that you were able to come and join us today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Lindsay's cat, who was part of the of the action today as well. Thank you for being here. And so maybe it's time to now turn it over to Lindsay as